So yesterday, as we all know, was the Feast of the Assumption of Mary into heaven, a feast that I could never get myself into, even as a child, with all the immaculate, pure, lowly, and meek stuff. I always felt that Mary was owned by the men of the church, many of whom prefer the yes, father type of woman, kind of woman I never was. So I've shared my feelings about that Mary of the Assumption several times, and I won't repeat it here. So yesterday, I didn't think about the meek, obedient, blonde, movie star Barbie-like Mary rising into heaven in glory. Instead, I thought of Our Lady of Guadalupe, a dark-skinned Mary who crossed many dangerous borders to stand with the poor and powerless because she had personally walked through the valley of the shadow of death in absolute despair. The real Mary probably never felt all that glorious because she knew what it was like to have her heart hurt, to have her child torn from her and executed unjustly. She knew that people like her mourned and needed to be comforted. She even knew that too many people like her hungered and thirsted for justice, but would be sent away empty because the rich would always take as much as they could. That is why the image of Our Lady of Guadalupe is so powerful. Mary stood with Juan Diego and the indigenous people of colonial Mexico, and not with the nominal Catholics who exploited, enslaved, and even murdered Juan Diego's people. Despite the devastation inflicted upon Native people, Mary understood that the poor and lowly could rise up like her son and put things back into right relationship. She knew that God always sees the truth and scatters the proud in the conceit of their heart. And she knew that God's mercy is from generation to generation, and that it is not reserved for the rich and famous. But rising up is a fearful, if necessary, thing. Those in power do their best to change the story, blame the victims, and make excuses for the violence they use to maintain their power. But Mary's children must always rise up so that the kingdom of Jesus moves from mirage to reality. So how do regular people get strong enough to confront the powers and meet the needs of those who hunger and thirst for justice? How do people learn to put God before frail human beings who have fallen short of the glory of God? Before power, money, and prestige? How do they become the divine's ears and eyes and hands and feet, indeed God's very heart? How do they learn to be merciful to everyone? How do they not seek to name their sisters and brothers as enemies or call those who disagree with them names? How can they remain humble and contrite, but also brave, courageous, and bold? How can they do this when the cost is so high? Well, nobody ever said that doing the work of God would be easy. Dedicating oneself to a kingdom envisioned by Jesus is not a one-time deal. A little water on the forehead, a host on the tongue, and oil on the forehead. Those of us who are married or in religious life know that saying I do is fairly easy compared to the hard work that comes after making that pledge. That is why it took such a great deal of time to become a Christian in the early days of the faith. Turning one's life over to God is not without problems and may clash with personal, familial, or national concerns. This is why the sacraments of initiation should never be rushed for anyone. But following God is such hard work. It requires a framework, a support, a practice, points of reference that provide guidance for goodness until God becomes one's default and loving one's neighbor becomes so habitual that it becomes a virtue. That framework, as anyone here knows, is not blind obedience. It is not memorization of dogma or doctrine. It does not suppress conscience or compassion, but rather emphasizes qualities that make the believer and their community a better place. Thus, following one's faith is not power over. It is not forced. Instead, it drops like the gentle rain from heaven upon a kind and generous and loving heart, softened by gentle guidance. Through this guidance comes charity, joy, peace, patience, goodwill, generosity, gentleness, faithfulness, wisdom, understanding, knowledge, and courage. Gifts of the Holy Spirit, who, as Miriam Teresa's hymn states, moves unrestricted amid a terribly conflicted world, populated by too many people who choose not to honor the pledges that they made to God. These all-important spiritual gifts enable the believer to ask whether an act is just and loving, rather than dogmatically correct or socially or politically acceptable. Of course, people also need people in order to grow into this kind of faith. It requires the guidance of the community, and most importantly, of family. The Spear family has been a blessing to the community of St. Mary Magdalene. And I dare say that we have been a blessing to them. Veronica and Phoebe are going to be confirmed in November, and Rosemary will make her communion on the same day. And they are fortunate to be taught by their warm and loving parents, who are bestowing their faith and their love of God upon their children, a gift that never stops giving. And our community will help to foster that faith as best we can. Veronica and Phoebe have been guided by their parents to understand that the Spirit is alive and well and walks among us. It is the Spirit who gives us grace, pressed down and overflowing into our laps every minute of our lives, so that those who truly love God will act with generosity and courage and peace. She is a Spirit who encourages us to use our prodigious gifts rather than burying them if they don't agree with the status quo. Rosemary is learning that, like Jesus, sometimes we are asked to give a lot of ourselves in order to help our sisters and brothers. She is learning that when we share communion, we become a sign of God's love, blessed and broken, poured and flowing, gift that God gave us. The Spear family came all the way from Allentown today so that Veronica, Phoebe, and Rosemary could announce their intentions to receive the sacraments of confirmation and Holy Communion in person, and so enter more fully into the life of our community and the life of our loving God. And so, Veronica, Phoebe, and Rosemary, may the Holy Spirit ever walk with you along the many pathways you will follow in your life. May she remain a source of strength and goodness all the days of your life. May she endow you with wisdom and kindness and strength of character. And may Our Lady of Guadalupe, a woman of kindness and compassion, be our guide as we do our very best to rise up against injustice, so that in the words of the late John Lewis, who was almost beaten to death while fighting against the unspeakable evil of racism, when we see something, we will do something, whatever that might be.